Hi everyone, welcome to our event today with Gemma Tracy, partner at JMW. Really appreciate you all taking the time. We are going to be recording today's session and we'll make it available to you. Please also, any questions, either put them in the chat or the Q&A. So over to you, Gemma.
Thank you so much, Nolene. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's session. My name's Gemma Tracy, and I'm a corporate immigration partner working at a company called JMW Solicitors. JMW is a full service national firm with offices in Manchester, Liverpool, and London, and I sit within our employment department at our Manchester office, but solely specialise in corporate immigration matters. The objectives of today's session is that we will be taking a look at the key insights in relation to immigration considerations surrounding international students undertaking work placements as part of their studies. And this is mainly because it's becoming increasingly more difficult to sponsor international students in the UK once they have completed their studies. Now, this is largely due to increases to the minimum salary levels that apply to sponsored skilled workers, but also due to increases in UKVI application fees, which will be seeing further increases in early April this year. Now, while the UK government is making it more difficult, international students still have several options open to them when they have completed their studies. So, for example, there's the graduate route that exists to enable the student to remain in the UK for 2 to 3 years. And also, international students can also benefit from salary reductions when looking at permanent sponsorship under the skilled worker route in the future. However, today, like I said, we're going to be looking at work placements that form part of the student's studies in the UK. So it's kind of before a student has completed their studies and before they're looking at kind of getting that permanent role in the UK. And I'm hoping that you leave the session today with an understanding of the immigration considerations that as an organisation you need to take into account when considering whether to offer a work placement to a student. What will we cover in today's session? So, first of all, we will have a look at what a work placement is. We will then delve into the requirements of a work placement in a bit more detail. Um, there are quite a lot of requirements, so I do try to break them down for you just so you have a little bit more of an understanding of when you can offer a work placement and what it entails. And then finally, we'll be having a look at right to work considerations, which is also an important aspect of the whole work placement and as an organisation more generally. So, first of all, then we will be looking at what is a work placement. So, a work placement is distinct from any employment that's been undertaken by a student in the UK. So, a student can still work in accordance with their student work restrictions, and they can also undertake a work placement, which is as part of their studies in the UK. Now, work placements enable a student to gain specific experience of working in the field for which they are studying. They help students to gain real world experience, build academic expertise, and develop transferable skills such as leadership, problem solving, and professional communication. It also enables students to apply their academic knowledge in a professional setting, and of significance, undertaking a work placement can enhance their employability. So, with many students who have completed a work placement going on to secure full time work with the organisation that offered them a work placement in the past. So, it's clear that undertaking a work placement has many benefits for a student in the UK. Now, employers can also benefit from offering work placements. Um, Experienced students are able to bring new ideas and innovative approaches to your workplace, and it can assist with future recruitment as you may want to offer the student permanent employment once they have completed their studies. International students can also help to create diverse workplaces, and there's also an element of corporate social responsibility because offering work placements demonstrates a company's commitment to supporting education and professional development, which in turn can enhance an organisation's reputation. Now, the work placement doesn't need to be directly relevant to the course being studied, but there must be some relevance. So, for example, I've worked with an organisation before where we had a student who was undertaking an engineering management master's degree, and they were able to undertake a management work placement in a retail or perhaps a catering organization. In our case, it was a catering organization. Um, whether the placement is in the field the student is studying is something that the university assesses, but in this case, although the work placement was nothing to do with engineering, it did have the management aspects that was relevant to the course that the student was studying, so it was sufficient. So it just means that it's quite a wide um, offering, really. And you might look at the course and think, oh no, we can't offer a work placement in that, but there may be aspects that you can assist the student with. Now, work placements are defined in the immigration rules, which can appear quite scary and lengthy, but they're defined as a placement that forms an integral and assessed part of the course of study, which meets the requirements of appendix student or appendix child student. So they're further appendices that are contained in our immigration rules. Um, Now, in appendix student, which is what a student needs to meet the requirements contained within to get their student visa, there is actually a work placement requirement. So because we're going to be delving into these requirements in a bit more detail, that's what we will go on to consider next. So the requirements of a work placement. Sorry, I'm just waiting for my slides to update. There we go. So work placements must be part of a course that leads to an approved qualification. So this includes qualifications that are at or above RQF level 3 in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. And the course must usually be validated by Royal Charter or awarded by a UK recognised body. There are other explanations as to what an approved qualification is, but generally, most courses that an international student can undertake in the UK as an international student are approved because students need to comply with an approved qualification requirement to get their student visa in the first instance. Now, of course, any bachelor's or master's degrees that are being offered by a university in the UK, such as Lancaster, would meet the approved qualification requirement because they'll be awarding the individual with a degree, which is an approved qualification. Now, we have to have something that's called a confirmation of acceptance for studies, or a CAS, that must be assigned by a student sponsor, so a university. And they are a sponsor that holds something called a sponsor license. If the course is below degree level, the CAS cannot be assigned by a probationary sponsor. And probationary sponsors are those who must demonstrate that they can fulfill their sponsorship duties and be trusted in order to hold a full student sponsor status. Many universities, such as Lancaster, then they're full student sponsors already. So that's just something to bear in mind. Particularly when you're looking at students who are wanting to do a work placement who are studying a course below degree level. Now, the work placement must be assessed as an integral part of the course that the student is studying in the UK. So it must be part of that course that they're studying, but there is no requirement that the work placement must be credit bearing or assessed as a pass or a fail. So it is simply a work placement. In relation to the length of a work placement, the general rule is that for courses below degree level, the work placement must not be longer than 1/3 of the total length of the course, unless there is a statutory requirement that the work placement must be longer. So for some courses, there might be a statutory requirement to say that this individual needs to undertake a 9-month work placement, even though the course is 12 months, for example. Now, courses that are at degree level or above have different requirements. So, in these circumstances, work placements can last for up to half of the total length of the course of study. And that's if the course is being studied at a higher education provider with a track record of compliance, and that would be many universities in the UK, such as Lancaster, for example. Other circumstances permit students studying at degree level or higher to complete a work placement lasting up to 50% of the total course too, including those that are studying at an overseas higher education institution in the UK, and there are some study abroad programs that permit that 50% length of the course of study too for work placements. Now, students and child students are able to undertake a sports related work placement as part of their course. Again, it must still be integral and assessed as part of the course and mustn't involve the student filling a permanent vacancy, which is a general rule for most students, well, for all students who are undertaking any form of work alongside their studies in the UK. And different requirements also exist for child students. So, for example, we may have child students who are studying music, drama, or dance, and they can potentially be involved in a professional performance as part of that course. So, with the work placement, details of the placement must be referenced on the student's CAS, so their confirmation of acceptance for studies, which is awarded by the student sponsor. The student sponsor can simply tick a box to confirm the course includes a work placement when the CAS is assigned to the student, and the student then uses that CAS as part of their visa application to relocate to the UK or to extend their permission to remain. Now, the CAS doesn't necessarily need to have extensive details about the work placement the student is undertaking in the UK. So often, a student might locate the work placement whilst they're in the UK as a student, as opposed to kind of having details of it at the start of their application to relocate to the UK. A student sponsor will remain responsible for the student during the work placement. So that's a really key requirement to bear in mind. So the student will remain sponsored by their student sponsor, and as an organisation offering the work placement, you won't then become the student sponsor. However, the student sponsor will likely require you to agree to terms in relation to the placement and to keep them up to date in relation to the student's whereabouts and their completion of the work placement. And that will just enable the student sponsor to meet their reporting and compliance obligations to the Home Office as the holder of a sponsor license and the sponsor of international students. Now, they will quite often do that by regular check-ins with you guys, either on a monthly, I think a monthly basis, kind of going forward, just to make sure that the student is completing the work placement. And as I've mentioned earlier, there are lots of benefits to work placements, and they can be really useful for students and organisations in the UK. So it's really important that organisations looking to offer work placements collaborate with universities to build strong relationships and develop structured programmes that can comply with the immigration requirements. And just bear in mind that we're dealing with a student sponsor already. They have their obligations to the Home Office. They understand the course that the student is studying. Um, and they're able to approve a work placement or work with you guys in relation to what work placement a student can undertake in the UK. So now we will have a look at right to work considerations. So, right to work is actually one of my favourite topics, which is that quite sad? I don't know. Um, but I regularly support quite a lot of UK organisations in relation to how to undertake a compliant right to work check. And in work placement matters, right to work requirements, they're often overlooked, but they're really important. So they're really important that you understand your obligations and what the requirements are. Now, it is very scary how many employers in the UK don't actually know how to undertake a compliant right to work check. Not undertaking a compliant right to work check isn't necessarily unlawful, but it could potentially open you up to a civil penalty for illegal working of up to £60,000 per employee that is found to be working illegally. So it's really important that organisations understand how to undertake a compliant right to work check. Now, organisations offering a work placement must undertake a right to work check as usual. Now, we have an international student who is undertaking this work placement in the UK. So, to undertake a right to work check for them, it'll involve us securing a share code, accessing the UKVI, the Home Office system, in the presence of the student, either in person or by video call, to ensure the information on the UKVI site belongs to the student who is presenting themselves for this work placement. Now, companies must also have procedures in place to ensure that the information held on file belongs to the individual who turns up to work on day one, because quite often the right to work check would be undertaken before the individual commences that work. And therefore there may be a gap between when the system was checked and when the individual turns up to work. And there might be two different people who have checked the ID. So it's just a matter of making sure there's a system in place to ensure that the correct individual is turning up to work who has this permission to work. Now, because we're also offering a work placement, although this is the standard right to work procedure, there is additional evidence that is required for those international students who are undertaking a work placement in the UK, which is on our next slide. So, in order to secure a statutory excuse against an illegal working civil penalty, organisations offering the work placement must secure the student's CAS, so the confirmation of acceptance for studies, which is generally something I'd advise you to secure anyway, whether the student is doing a work placement or not. But in matters specifically involving a work placement, we also need a letter from the student sponsor that is referenced on the student's confirmation of acceptance for studies. And this letter from the student sponsor must confirm that the work placement forms an integral and assessed part of the course, so a requirement we already know we need to meet, that the work placement does not breach the permitted 1/3 or 50% half length requirements. And if you are able to benefit from this enhanced 50% length of the course, for the work placement, we need to explain why we're able to do that in the letter. So, for example, we'd just have to include on the letter that the course is at degree level and the individual is sponsored by a higher education provider with a track record of compliance. And that proves that in this case, we're entitled to offer a work placement, which is for up to 50% of the student's total course. The letter should also confirm the terms and conditions of the work placement, what work the student is expected to undertake on the work placement, and finally, how and when the student will be assessed. Now, these are all requirements that are contained in Home Office right to work guidance. And in my experience with dealing with work placements, student sponsors often provide multiple documents. So we don't necessarily have one letter, which is all the guidance wants, but we'll have multiple documents. Combined together, they do usually comply with the right to work requirements. So it's just a matter of making sure that all the information that we need to evidence in order to gain that statutory excuse to a civil penalty being imposed is clearly referenced on the documents that are presented. Now, if the student is working outside of the work placement in accordance with work restrictions imposed upon them as a student, you just need to remember to separate this work to the work placement work. Now, it's certainly permitted. Students can work in accordance with their work restrictions, so usually a minimum of 20 hours per week for those studying at degree level or above during term time. Um, and obviously, in these cases, when you're doing your right to work check, you need the CAS to confirm where they're studying. You then need the term dates from the student sponsor. So make sure you've got all those on file. Um, you then need, if they're doing a work placement, this letter from the organisation confirming the terms that we've spoken about today. And you just need to bear in mind that if you've got one student who's doing a work placement but is also working in accordance with their work restrictions, it could be quite difficult to manage because you'd need to comply with the student work restrictions in terms of that work placement only lasting either a third or up to 50% of the total course, but you also need to evidence the maximum hours that a student can work in accordance with their student work restrictions. So it's definitely possible, but it's just something that you would need to carefully evidence and to prove that certain shifts are part of the work placement and certain shifts are outside of the work placement and are part of employment um, that you're offering the students in accordance with their student work restrictions. And that's basically it in a nutshell. So they're nothing to be scared of. Secure offering work placements, there's a lot of benefits to offering work placements to organisations and to students. There are, it's immigration, so there are a lot of requirements, but once broken down, organisations in the UK should understand that it is fairly easy to offer a work placement to an international student in the UK. It's useful that we have a student sponsor who's on board. They've already got many obligations with the Home Office as a student sponsor, and they understand the requirements of a work placement. So they know the importance of work placements to students who are studying in the UK. So it's not as if you're on your own in terms of kind of when, what work placement you're going to offer or anything like that. So I am now happy to take any questions about work placement or immigration more generally, if anyone has any questions, and I will just leave my final slide on there that's got my details on if anyone has any questions after the session.
Thanks, Gemma. That was really good. Yeah, we can see that with your contact details now. That's fantastic. Thanks for sharing that. And I do think that that's really helped to clarify things for colleagues and employers that we work with. Because we do increasingly find that our international students are being rejected at placement applications, and
Oh,
the
okay.
feedback they're getting can be a bit confusing for the student, but also as well for the employers, because we know it's it can be a little bit confusing out there. So appreciate you
It
clearing a
is,
lot
and
of things
like
up.
like I said, with immigration, like the Home Office just makes things so complex with so many requirements. But like once we break them down and we realise that we've got a student sponsor on
Yeah,
board, it isn't that much kind of that many obligations. Like as long as they
yeah.
individual companies make sure that those right to work checks are met, it's
Mhm.
fairly straightforward taking it forward.
Yeah, and in our service, for example, just to share with those on online, we do the monthly compliance check. So we check in with our students on a monthly basis and share that with our visa team. So that's something that we have in place, and I know colleagues across higher education have similar checks in place. So it takes that, any kind of burden away from the employer.
Yeah,
Um, but also as well, just hiring international students can just be such a great addition to your team, in terms of perspective, diversity, just having students come and add value to your organization, regardless of where they're from,
yeah,
opens up a whole talent pool that you might be restricting yourself to. So I think it's a great way to get talent into the business at an early stage, but also helps to raise your brand across the student community. Because if the student has a great experience, then they're going to talk about you as a potential graduate destination as well.
Yeah, and when I attended one of the careers fairs that you were offering, like I spoke to many students that actually completed a work placement as part of their course, and then they subsequently went on to get full-time employment once they'd completed. So it makes that recruitment exercise a lot easier for an employer, doesn't it? Because
Yeah.
they already know there's someone available that's able to undertake the role, and obviously it's beneficial for the student because they're able to then remain in the UK either as a graduate or as a skilled worker.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. I'm just double checking. There's no questions that have come in because
Not
we
yet.
knew that this topic was going to be shorter and fairly straightforward. We just wanted to really focus on this as an area because, as I said, it has raised questions from employers, but also students.
Mm.
Something else come in. Can you confirm what immigration requirements are in place for international students undertaking a work placement overseas, either at a host organization or university which has links to sending HEI? I think that's different. So this would be, and correct me if I'm wrong, Gemma. So this is focused on UK based placements.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, I found from my experience, having students do overseas placements, it is very difficult unless the student has the right to work in that country, for them to do a placement. So very few countries offer a placement visa, if that makes sense, or a
Yeah,
placement
it'd be very
equivalent.
similar to the UK. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then
Yeah.
like you'd have to go down the route of can you do that sort of work as a visitor? And nine times out of ten, you probably can't if it's for a
Hmm.
specific length of time. So it'd depend on kind of what your immigration
Yeah.
status is and whether, if you were going back to your country of nationality, for example, then,
Hmm.
perhaps yes, you could undertake
Yeah.
a work placement there. But yeah, if you were going to another country that you're neither a
Hmm.
national of and have a visa for there already, it'd be a matter of working out
Hmm.
how to do that, and it does get a
Yeah.
little bit more complex.
Yeah, and there are exceptions to the rule. So I do know that some companies in Hong Kong, for instance, might be able to sponsor a placement
Okay.
opportunity, but also there's the J1 visa for the USA, although we don't know what's happening there at the minute because there is a lot of immigration changes. Um, so I would recommend that if you have students who want to do placement overseas, use prospects.ac.uk. They have a whole section on working abroad with links out to visa information. And if they're still struggling, maybe contact the embassy for that country, just to get some insight into what the options are for working during your studies in another country. But most of our students who work overseas tend to be getting their placement in their home country, because they're wanting to gain that experience and visibility in their home markets because that's where they're going back to. So I
Yeah, the
hope,
EU would be a good one as well for any EU students.
yeah,
Like obviously you've got
yeah,
free movement, haven't you, around the EU, so that would be fairly straightforward for you to
yeah,
kind of relocate to another EU country. That's one of the dreadful another reason as to why we should never have left the EU, but there we
yeah, yeah.
go.
So if you do have EU students or British students with EU passports, so for instance, I'm Irish, my son has an Irish and a
Yeah.
British passport. So if they've got dual nationality, potentially looking into that. Or what I found as well over the years is by having conversations with some students, they've not realized, oh, actually, I could apply for dual nationality somewhere.
Yeah.
So being able to do that and having that conversation is something as well. So I hope that's helped. Um,
Yeah, and it's like I say, if anyone has any other kind of more general immigration questions, like I'm free, so you can ask me during this session. But yeah, like with work placements, it's a very specific subject, so it's not
yes.
something I can talk to you about for an hour, unfortunately.
No, we just needed it. I'm just so glad that we were able to dedicate a session to this area so we can clarify any questions anyone may have had or any confusions around that. So thank you for taking the time, Gemma, today, and
Yeah, no
thank you for
problem.
everybody for joining us. We really appreciate it. We have recorded this session and we will make it available on our YouTube channel. So if you don't have links to that, let me know and we'll send it out to you. But thanks all for joining us today, and you can go get yourself another coffee, cup of tea, or a bit of an early lunch.
Thank you so
So
much, everyone.
thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.